life into before and after. My name is Jake, and at 19 years old, I learned that sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to become the villain everyone already thinks you are. Let me paint you a picture of where the story starts. Picture a house that you feel like home, but instead feels like a tomb where dreams go to die. That was my reality every single day. I was working 2 jobs back then, pulling 10-hour shifts in an Amazon warehouse during the day, and then dragging my exhausted body to a security guard gig at night. 60-hour weeks became my normal. My back ached constantly. My hands had permanent calluses. I smelled like cardboard and industrial floor cleaner, no matter how many times I showered. But none of that mattered because I wasn't doing it for me. The house technically belonged to my grandmother, Nancy. Legally, officially, on every piece of paper that mattered, it was hers. She had bought it back in the 70s when houses actually cost what a normal person could afford. My parents moved in about 15 years ago under the pretense of being her caregivers after my grandfather passed. Caregivers. That a nice word for what they actually were, which was parasites with a mortgage-free address. My mom spent most of her waking hours with a wine glass surgically attached to her hand. Not the cheap stuff either. She had standards about her slow-motion self-destruction. $18 bottles from a fancy grocery store, the kind with the French words on the label that she couldn't pronounce. She'd start around 11 in the morning, just a small glass with lunch, she'd claim, and by dinner she'd be swaying and slurring while complaining about how hard her life was. My dad was a different kind of waste. He used to work construction back in the day, and he never let anyone forget it. Every conversation somehow circled back to the good old days when men were men, and he could frame a house in his sleep. Now he spent 14 hours a day on the couch, scrolling through Facebook on his phone, occasionally yelling at the television when sports didn't go his way. His contribution to the household consisted of taking out the trash once a week and complaining that nobody respected him. Then there was my older brother Tyler, 24 years old and absolutely convinced he was God's gift to finance. He called himself a crypto trader, which was a fancy way of saying he gambled with my parents' money and occasionally got lucky. He'd walk around the house talking about blockchain and market caps and disruption like he was some kind of Silicon Valley genius. In reality, he'd turned $3,000 into $4,000 over 2 years, which somehow made him an expert worth listening to. He treated me like I was mentally deficient because I worked real jobs instead of staring at price charts all day. This was my family. This was the environment I woke up to every single morning. The only light in that house was Grandma Nancy. She had a massive stroke 3 years before this all went down. It left her mostly paralyzed on her right side and unable to speak. She could understand everything. Her mind was still sharp, but the words just wouldn't come out. She'd squeeze your hand or move her eyes to communicate, and if you paid attention, really paid attention, you could understand her. Nobody paid attention except me. I'd sit with her every night after my shifts, even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I'd tell her about my day, read her the news, show her funny videos on my phone. Her eyes would light up, and she'd make this small sound that was almost like a laugh. Those moments were the only thing keeping me sane. My parents saw her as an inconvenience, a burden, a thing that required feeding and cleaning and medication. They did the bare minimum to keep her alive because they needed her alive. Dead grandmothers don't own houses. Dead grandmothers can't sign over property rights. So they kept her breathing while fantasizing about the day she'd finally stop. I know that sounds harsh. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating for effect. I'm not. The night everything changed started like any other. I got home from my warehouse shift around 7:30, and the house had that familiar feeling of low-grade toxicity. Mom was on her 3rd glass of wine. Dad was yelling at a basketball game. Tyler was in his room, doing whatever it is that crypto geniuses do when they're avoiding real responsibility. I went straight to the kitchen to handle the dinner dishes that had been piling up since the previous night. Nobody else in that house seemed to understand how sinks worked. As I stood there scrubbing dried food off plates, I heard my parents talking in the dining room. The layout of that old house meant sound carried weird. They probably thought they were being quiet. They weren't. My mom's voice came through first, slightly slurred but perfectly clear. She was asking how much longer Nancy would last. Not in a concerned way. Not like she was worried about her suffering. She said it the same way you'd ask, how much longer until your pizza delivery arrives? My hand stopped moving. The plate I was holding hovered under the running water. Mom kept talking. She mentioned seeing houses for sale in Florida, retirement communities with golf courses and pools. She'd been browsing real estate websites, apparently looking at properties, making plans. She said prices were climbing, and they needed to sell this house while the market was hot. My father's response made my blood turn to ice. He brought up Nancy's doctor appointment from the previous week, mentioned how the cardiologist said her heart was weak. Then he suggested something that I still can't think about without feeling sick. He wondered out loud if they stopped paying for her expensive medications, whether nature might take its course a little faster. His exact words were that she was basically a vegetable anyway, so what difference did it make? The sponge I was holding made a wet, tearing sound. I'd been squeezing it so hard it actually ripped in half. Soap and water ran down my arms. I stood there shaking, trying to process what I'd just heard. These were my parents, the people who were supposed to love and protect their family. And they were casually discussing murdering my grandmother through medical neglect so they could sell her house and move to Florida. I don't remember walking to Grandma Nancy's room. I just remember suddenly being there, standing in her doorway. The room smelled like the lavender lotion I rubbed on her hands every night and the faint medicinal scent of prescription creams. She was propped up in her adjustable bed, watching one of those old game shows on the small television I'd set up for her. When I came in, her eyes shifted to me. Even with half her face frozen, I could see the love there, the recognition, the trust. I walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, taking her good hand in both of mine. Her skin was thin and papery, covered in age spots, but her grip was surprisingly strong. I leaned close and whispered a promise that I meant with every cell in my body. I told her I wouldn't let them do it. I wouldn't let them hurt her. I'd find a way to protect her. Her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak, but she squeezed my hand 3 times. Our code. It meant I love you. The next day was my day off, which was rare. Instead of sleeping in like a normal person, I dragged myself out of bed early because Nancy needed a prescription refilled. Her heart medication, ironically enough, the same pills my parents were apparently planning to discontinue. The pharmacy was connected to a grocery store about 2 miles away. I could have driven, but I was trying to save gas money, so I walked. After picking up the medication, I stopped at the gas station next door. I needed coffee, the kind of burnt-tasting sludge that comes out of convenience store machines and probably violates the Geneva Convention. As I was paying, I saw the lottery display behind the counter. Powerball was up to $84 million. The number seemed obscene, impossible, the kind of money that existed only in theory for people like me. I had $6.37 left after paying for Nancy's medication and my coffee. On impulse, probably because I was exhausted and not thinking straight, I bought a ticket. 1 ticket. Quick pick. I didn't even choose the numbers myself. Just let the machine generate them randomly. The clerk handed me the flimsy piece of paper, and I shoved it in my pocket without looking at it. I remember thinking it was stupid, a waste of money I didn't have. But there was something almost meditative about the possibility, you know? Like maybe the universe wasn't completely rigged against people like me. I forgot about the ticket for 2 days. 2 days of grinding through warehouse shifts, scanning packages until my eyes burned, coming home to that toxic house, and pretending everything was normal. 2 days of watching my parents treat my grandmother like an inconvenience while they planned their future Florida retirement. On the 3rd day, I was using the bathroom at the warehouse during my lunch break, sitting in that echoey industrial stall, scrolling to my phone to avoid thinking about the 6 more hours of manual labor ahead of me. A notification popped up. Powerball winner announced. I clicked it without thinking. The winning numbers appeared on my screen. I stared at them. Then I pulled out my wallet because I'd stuck the lottery ticket in there and forgotten about it. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the paper and compared the numbers. They matched. All of them. Every single one. $84 million. I want you to understand something. My first emotion wasn't joy. It wasn't excitement or relief or even disbelief. My first emotion was pure, ice-cold terror, because I immediately understood what this meant. If I told my family, if I was honest about this ticket, several things would happen in rapid succession. First, they'd psychologically manipulate me into giving them the money. They'd been doing it my whole life, making me feel guilty for existing, convincing me I owed them for raising me. They were experts at it. I was 19 years old and had been trained since birth to believe I was worthless. They'd have that money in a trust fund with their names on it before the ink dried on the check. Second, they put Nancy in the cheapest nursing home they could find, some understaffed warehouse where old people go to die slowly and alone. They'd visit once a month maybe, if that. She'd spend her final days surrounded by strangers, wondering why I abandoned her. The thought made me physically ill. Third, they'd destroy me. Maybe not physically, though I wasn't entirely sure about that where Tyler was concerned. But emotionally, psychologically, they'd grind me down until there was nothing left. I'd become the family story, the ungrateful son who won the lottery and refused to share. Never mind that they'd been planning to kill my grandmother for house money. I sat in that bathroom stall for 20 minutes, just breathing, trying to think clearly. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone came in, used the urinal, left. The warehouse PA system announced something about productivity targets. Normal life continued all around me while my entire existence had just detonated. Eventually, my thoughts started to organize themselves. A plan began forming, piece by piece, like my brain was working on a puzzle it didn't consciously understand yet. If I claimed this money openly, I'd lose everything that mattered. But if I was smart, if I was willing to do something extreme, maybe I could protect Nancy and escape at the same time. The solution was so obvious, it was almost funny. My family already thought I was worthless. They already treated me like a burden and a failure. What if I leaned into that? What if I became such a massive problem, such a potential financial liability, that they'd want nothing to do with me? What if I could make them so desperate to distance themselves that they'd do it legally, officially, with signatures and witnesses? If they disowned me, legally cut me off, they'd have no claim to anything I owned, including lottery winnings they didn't know existed. I finished my shift on autopilot. My body went through the motions of scanning packages and stacking boxes, while my mind was miles away, refining the plan. It had to be believable. It had to be something they'd buy completely, and it had to make them desperate enough to act immediately. When I got home that night, the house was quiet. Mom had passed out in her chair with an empty wine bottle on the side table. Dad was snoring on the couch. Tyler was presumably in his room, studying his precious charts. Nancy was asleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. I stood in the hallway between their rooms, feeling like I was standing at a crossroads. Down one path was honesty, which led to betrayal and loss. Down the other was deception, which might lead to freedom, not just for me, for both of us. I went to my room and closed the door. My room was barely more than a large closet, but it was mine. Posters I'd hung in high school still clung to the walls. My twin bed took up most of the space. A small desk I bought at a thrift store held my ancient laptop, and a lamp that flickered if you bumped it. I sat down at that desk and opened my laptop. The screen cast a pale blue light across my face. Outside my window, the neighborhood was dark and quiet. It was 2 a.m. In a few hours, I'd have to get up for another shift. But sleep wasn't possible now. The lottery ticket sat on the desk in front of me. $84 million on a piece of paper the size of a receipt. I picked it up, feeling its weight. It weighed nothing. It weighed everything. My eyes drifted to the wall, to a loose section of paneling near the floor that I discovered years ago. Behind it was a gap in the wall, a space between the drywall and the exterior where someone had done sloppy construction work decades ago. It was the perfect hiding place. I got down on my knees and carefully pried the panel loose. The space behind it was dark and dusty. I took the lottery ticket and slid it deep into the gap, as far back as my arm could reach. Then I replaced the panel and made sure it looked undisturbed. $84 million was now hidden in my wall, and nobody in the world knew about it except me. I sat back down at my laptop and stared at the blank screen. The hard part was about to begin. I needed to become someone they'd want to throw away. I needed to manufacture a crisis so convincing, so terrifying to their selfish interests, that they'd rush to legally separate themselves from me. And I knew exactly how to do it. My brother Tyler, the self-proclaimed financial genius, had been bragging for months about leverage trading and margin accounts. He loved throwing around terms to make himself sound sophisticated. Flash crashes, stop losses, liquidation cascades. He'd lecture anyone who'd listen about the risks and rewards of trading with borrowed money. What he didn't know was that I'd been listening, really listening, learning the vocabulary, understanding the mechanics. Not because I care about crypto or day trading, but because information is power, and I'd learned to hoard any scrap of power I could find in that house. Now I was going to use his own expertise against him. I opened a photo editing program on my laptop. It was free software, nothing fancy, but it would do the job. I spent the next 3 hours creating something that would change everything. A fake screenshot, a manufactured catastrophe, a digital bomb that would make my family so desperate to cut me loose that they'd do exactly what I needed them to do. When I finished, I leaned back and looked at my work. It was perfect, terrifyingly believable. The kind of financial disaster that would make my family's blood run cold. I saved the file, closed my laptop, and finally let myself feel it. Not triumph, not yet, but something close to hope. A fragile, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, I could save us both. Outside, the sun was starting to rise. Another day was beginning. But for me, everything was about to change. The plan was in motion. The next 48 hours were some of the strangest of my life. I walked through my warehouse shifts like a ghost, my body performing the motions while my brain operated in a completely different dimension. I was planning something that felt simultaneously insane and necessary, a controlled demolition of my own life to save the only person who'd ever actually loved me. I spent every spare moment refining the fake screenshot on my laptop. The free photo editing software wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. I wasn't creating art. I was creating a believable financial catastrophe, the kind of thing that would send my family into an immediate panic spiral. The key was making it look authentic, not just some red numbers on a screen, but a genuine trading platform interface with all the right details. I studied real screenshots from trading apps, memorized the layout, the fonts, the exact way information was displayed. The devil was in the details, and I needed those details to be perfect because my brother Tyler, for all his flaws, actually understood this stuff. The fictional trading account I created belonged to a platform called Apex Trader. I chose it because it was real enough that Tyler would recognize the name, but obscure enough that he wouldn't have personal experience with their exact interface. The account name was mine. The timestamp was from 2 days ago, right after the market close. But here's where it got beautiful. The balance wasn't just negative. It was catastrophically, life-destroyingly negative. Margin debt / negative balance : negative $482,000. Not 400,000. Not 500,000. 482,000 specifically. That level of precision made it real. Round numbers feel fake. Specific numbers feel like they came from an actual calculation. Below that, I added the transaction history. A single leverage position on a volatile crypto asset. Entry price, exit price, the works. The math actually checked out if you bothered to calculate it, which Tyler definitely would. I'd open a position with 50 times leverage, which sounds insane because it is insane, and then the price had moved against me during a flash crash event. For those who don't speak finance, let me explain what I was faking. Leverage trading means you're borrowing money from the exchange to make bigger bets. If you have $1,000 and use 50 times leverage, you're controlling a $50,000 position. When it works, your gains are multiplied by 50. When it doesn't work, your losses are also multiplied by 50. And if the market moves fast enough in the wrong direction, You could end up owing the exchange more money than you started with. It's financial Russian roulette, and Tyler loved lecturing people about it. The story I constructed was simple but devastating. I'd supposedly been trying to make money for Grandma Nancy's care, maybe even afford some experimental treatment or a better home health aid. I'd heard Tyler talking about his wins and thought I could do it too. I'd opened an account, deposited my savings, and used maximum leverage on what I thought was a safe bet. Then the flash crash happened, a real phenomenon where prices temporarily plummet due to algorithmic trading gone haywire. It happens in crypto markets with disturbing frequency. During one of these crashes, stop-loss orders, which is supposed to automatically close your position at a predetermined price to limit losses, sometimes don't execute properly. The system lags. By the time your position closes, the price is cratered so far that you're not just at zero. You're in debt to the exchange. This wasn't theoretical. This actually happened to real people. That's what made my lie so perfect. It was plausible enough that Tyler would believe it immediately. I added one more crucial detail to the screenshot, a notification banner at the top of the screen stating that the account was under review and that I had 7 business days to deposit the negative balance or face legal action for debt collection. The kind of corporate language that makes your stomach drop when you read it. When I was finished, I sat back and looked at my work. It was terrifying how real it looked. For a moment, I almost believed it myself. The next step was preparing myself physically for performance. I needed to look like someone who just discovered they destroyed their life. Pale, shaky, on the edge of a breakdown. That meant no sleep and a lot of caffeine on an empty stomach. The morning of the day I planned to drop this bomb, I didn't eat breakfast. I pounded 3 cups of gas station coffee before my warehouse shift, which made my hands shake and my heart race. Good. During lunch, I had more coffee instead of food. By the time my shift ended, I felt genuinely awful, jittery, nauseous, pale. My hands trembled when I held them out. Perfect. I drove home with a screenshot loaded on my phone, rehearsing what I'd say. The key was to seem genuine, devastated, like I'd made a terrible mistake born from good intentions. I couldn't seem manipulative or calculated. I had to be the screw-up they already thought I was, just at a magnitude that finally mattered to them. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat in my car for a few minutes doing breathing exercises. Not to calm down, but to maintain the right level of controlled panic. Too calm and they'd suspect something. Too hysterical and I'd lose credibility. I needed to hit that sweet spot of a young person who'd made a catastrophic error and didn't know what to do. I walked into the house around 6:30. The usual scene greeted me. Mom in her chair with her wine. Dad on the couch with the television blaring some cable news show. Tyler in the kitchen, actually cooking for once. Probably some elaborate meal he'd post on social media to prove he wasn't a complete waste of space. Grandma Nancy was in her room. I could hear the faint sound of her television through the closed door. That gave me a strange moment of clarity. I was about to set off a bomb in this house. Everything was about to change. And it was all to protect that one person who couldn't even speak to thank me for it. I took a breath and walked into the kitchen. Tyler was at the stove, doing something with a pan that involved more flame than seemed strictly necessary. He glanced at me with his usual expression of mild contempt, the look he gave me approximately 20 times a day. He asked if I was going to contribute to dinner or just stand there looking useless. His tone was casual cruelty, the kind he perfected over years of practice. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The tremor wasn't even fake anymore. The coffee and adrenaline had me genuinely wired. I unlocked it, pulled up the screenshot, and just stood there staring at it with what I hoped looked like shock and horror. Tyler noticed my hands shaking. His expression shifted from contempt to curiosity. He asked what was wrong with me, if I was having some kind of medical situation. I looked up at him. This was it, the point of no return. I told him I'd messed up, that I'd messed up really, really badly. My voice cracked on the words, which wasn't planned but worked perfectly. Tyler's interest sharpened. He could smell blood in the water. He turned down the stove and walked over to me, asking what I was talking about. I explained that I'd been trying to make money, that I'd heard him talking about leverage trading and thought I could do it too, that I wanted to help pay for grandma's care because mom and dad were always complaining about how expensive her medications were. Tyler's expression was already shifting toward that particular kind of satisfaction he got when I proved his low opinion of me correct. He told me to show him what I was looking at. I handed him my phone like I was handing over evidence at my own trial. He looked at the screen. His eyes scanned the interface. I watched his face go through several distinct stages: confusion, recognition, comprehension, and then pure, undiluted horror. He asked me if this was real, if this was actually my account. I nodded, told him I'd opened it 3 weeks ago, that I'd been doing okay at first, small wins, nothing crazy. But then I tried to make one big move right before the market closed 2 days ago. A crypto position with high leverage, because Tyler always talked about how that's where the real money was. Then the flash crash happened. Tyler's face had gone white. He asked me if I understood what a negative balance meant, if I comprehended that this wasn't like losing money at a casino where you just walked away broke. I told him I knew, that the app had been sending me notifications, that they wanted the money within 7 days or they pursue legal action. He zoomed in on the number, $482,000. His hands were shaking now, too. He started muttering, talking more to himself than to me. Something about slippage and how stop losses were supposed to prevent this exact scenario. How the exchange must have experienced a liquidity crisis during the crash and closed positions at the worst possible prices. This was the genius of using Tyler's own knowledge against him. He wasn't questioning whether this could happen. He was explaining to himself exactly how it had happened. He was authenticating my lie with his own expertise. He asked me what crypto I'd been trading. I told him it was a leveraged token on a mid-cap asset, one of the volatile ones he'd mentioned having a position in last month. His face somehow got even paler. He told me I was an idiot, that trading with that kind of leverage during a Federal Reserve announcement week was literally the dumbest thing anyone could do, that the volatility was guaranteed, and the flash crash probability went through the roof during those periods. I said I didn't know, that I'd just seen the position moving up and thought I'd make a quick profit before bed. By this point, our conversation had gotten loud enough to draw attention. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway, asking what all the yelling was about. Mom was right behind him, wine glass in hand, looking annoyed at having her evening viewing interrupted. Tyler held up my phone like it was evidence at a crime scene. He told them I'd done something incredibly stupid, that I destroyed my life and possibly theirs too. Mom asked what he was talking about. Her words were slightly slurred, which meant she was on glass number 4 or 5. Tyler launched into an explanation, using all his finance terminology. He talked about margin debt and technical overdrafts and asset seizure. He made it sound even worse than I'd imagined, adding details about how exchanges pursue these debts and how they could go after anyone registered at the debtor's address. Dad's expression shifted from confusion to anger. He asked if Tyler was saying that debt collectors could come after their house. Tyler confirmed it, told him that because I was registered at this address, because I had no other assets, the exchange would absolutely pursue collection against any property associated with my name. And since I was legally a resident here, that put their house in danger. Mom made it sound like she'd been punched. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure hatred, not disappointment or frustration. Actual hatred. She said I destroyed everything, that they'd been planning their future, their retirement, that the house was supposed to be their nest egg after Nancy passed. And now I put all of it at risk. Notice she didn't say after Nancy died. She said after Nancy passed, like it was a scheduled event they were waiting for. Like my grandmother was a television show that would eventually reach its series finale and free up their evening slot. Dad started pacing. He was asking Tyler questions about the legal mechanics, whether the debt could be discharged in bankruptcy, whether there was any way to protect their assets. Tyler said bankruptcy wouldn't help because this was a margin debt, not a normal loan, that it was more like fraud from the exchange's perspective, that they'd pursue it aggressively because letting it slide would set a precedent for other traders to take ridiculous risks knowing they could just declare bankruptcy. The words fraud and legal action hung in the air like nerve gas. Mom turned to me and asked how I could do this to them. She wasn't crying. She was furious. She wanted to know if I had any idea what I'd cost them, if I understood that I'd ruined their lives. Not my life. Their lives. I started to respond, to say I'd been trying to help, but Tyler cut me off. He said it didn't matter now, that the only thing that mattered was damage control. He told Mom and Dad they needed to legally separate themselves from me as quickly as possible, that they needed documentation proving I was not financially connected to them in any way, that every day they waited was another day the exchange could build a case that our assets were entangled. Dad asked how they'd do that. His voice had taken on a desperate edge. Tyler said they needed a lawyer, that they needed to draft a formal disownment document, something that explicitly stated I was not entitled to any family assets and that they bore no responsibility for my debts, something that would hold up if the exchange came after them. Mom was already pulling out her phone. She was Googling lawyers, her fingers stabbing at the screen with angry precision. She found some guy who advertised cheap family legal services, the kind of attorney whose office is in a strip mall between a nail salon and a vape shop. She was calling him, right then, at 7 o'clock at night, demanding an emergency appointment, offering to pay extra if he'd see them tonight. I stood there watching this unfold with a mixture of genuine shock and hidden satisfaction. My plan had worked even better than I'd hoped. I thought I'd have to push them toward this decision. Instead, they'd arrived at it themselves in under 5 minutes. Greed and self-preservation had overridden every other consideration so quickly it was almost beautiful. Dad was asking Tyler if this would really work, if cutting me loose legally would protect them. Tyler assured him it would, that if they had documentation showing clear separation before the exchange filed any liens, they'd be protected. He added that they should probably kick me out too, establish that I didn't even live here anymore, make it impossible for anyone to argue their assets were connected to mine. Mom got through to the lawyer. I could hear his voice through her phone speaker, confused and annoyed at being called after business hours. She was explaining the situation in dramatic terms, saying it was an emergency, that hundreds of thousands of dollars were at stake, that they needed to see him tonight. He must have agreed because her expression shifted to grim satisfaction. She hung up and announced they had an appointment in an hour, that all of us needed to go. I asked if they were really doing this, if they were really going to disown me over a mistake. Dad told me to shut up, that I'd lost the right to have an opinion when I'd gambled away $500,000 that I didn't have, that I'd endangered everything they'd worked for. The house that belonged to Grandma Nancy. The house they lived in rent-free while planning her death like it was a vacation they'd booked in advance. Tyler was looking at me with something almost like respect for the first time in years. Not because he cared about me, but because I'd managed to screw up on a scale that impressed him. He told Mom and Dad that we should go now, get this handled tonight, because the clock was ticking. They agreed immediately. No hesitation. No second thoughts about whether disowning their youngest son might be an overreaction. Mom went to get changed into something more presentable than her wine-stained lounge clothes. Dad was already putting on shoes, muttering under his breath about incompetent children and ruined dreams. Everything they'd worked for. The house that belonged to Grandma Nancy. The house they lived in rent-free while planning her death like it was a vacation they'd booked in advance. Tyler pulled me aside while our parents were getting ready. His voice dropped to something that was probably meant to sound threatening. He told me I'd better cooperate fully with whatever the lawyer said, that if I fought this or made it difficult, they'd make my life even worse than it already was, that I'd end up not just broke, but completely alone. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He thought he was warning me. He thought I needed to understand the consequences of my actions. What he didn't understand was that I was already 3 moves ahead, and every word out of his mouth was just confirmation that the trap was working perfectly. I told him I understood, that I'd sign whatever they wanted, that I knew I'd messed up and didn't deserve anything from them. My voice was small, defeated, exactly what he needed to hear. He seemed satisfied with that, like my submission was the natural order of things being restored, like the universe was correcting itself after a brief, chaotic disruption. He nodded and told me to get in the car when everyone was ready. I stood there in that hallway, listening to my parents move around upstairs, and had to focus on keeping my breathing steady. Not from fear, from excitement. The adrenaline was real. This was actually happening. After all the planning, all the careful preparation, I was watching my family sprint toward the exact trap I'd laid for them. They thought they were protecting themselves from financial ruin. What they were actually doing was signing away any legal claim to the single largest lottery jackpot in our state's history. The beauty of it was that they were doing it eagerly, desperately, with their own lawyers and their own signatures. Mom came back downstairs, having changed into a blouse that didn't have wine stains. Dad had found a jacket. They looked almost respectable, like responsible adults handling a family crisis. The illusion was perfect except for the expressions on their faces, which showed nothing but cold calculation and self-preservation. Mom grabbed her purse and announced it was time to go. Dad was already jingling his car keys. Tyler gestured for me to follow them out to the driveway. As we headed for the door, I glanced back toward Grandma Nancy's room. Her door was closed. The faint blue light of her television flickered underneath. She had no idea what was happening out here. No idea that the family she'd sheltered and supported was currently in the process of legally amputating one of its own members to protect their claim on her house. The house they were already planning to sell before her body was cold. Dad unlocked the car, and we all got in. Nobody spoke. The silence was thick with tension, but it was different flavors of tension. They were tense with fear and anger. I was tense with anticipation. We were all heading to the same destination, but for completely different reasons. The engine started. Dad backed out of the driveway. The neighborhood rolled past my window, familiar streets I'd known my whole life, and I realized I was probably seeing them for the last time as a member of this family. By the time we drove back up this street, everything would be different. I'd be legally free. Tyler was in the front passenger seat, checking his phone, probably reading articles about margin debt and asset seizure, making sure he understood the threat well enough to explain it to the lawyer. He was so focused on the fake crisis that he couldn't see the real one unfolding right in front of him. Mom was in the back seat next to me, staring out her window. I could smell the wine on her breath. She'd finished another glass before we left. Needed the liquid courage, probably. Disowning your son is easier with a little Cabernet in your system. Dad's jaw was clenched as he drove. His hands gripped the steering wheel tight enough that his knuckles were white. He kept muttering things under his breath, fragments of sentences about responsibility and consequences, and how he'd known I'd amount to nothing. Part of me wanted to laugh. Part of me wanted to tell them everything right there in the car. Just blurt out that the debt was fake, the lottery ticket was real, and they were about to make the biggest mistake of their miserable lives. But I didn't, because this wasn't just about the money. This was about Grandma Nancy. This was about making sure that when I came back with resources to help her, they'd have no legal standing to interfere. This was about creating a clean break that would hold up in court when I filed for emergency guardianship. The money was just a tool. Saving her was the goal. So I kept my mouth shut and watched the streetlights pass by, counting down the minutes until everything changed forever. The strip mall where the lawyer's office was located came into view. Dad pulled into the parking lot. The neon sign advertising legal services flickered weakly in the darkness. It was exactly the kind of place you'd go if you needed cheap legal work done fast and didn't ask too many questions. Perfect for what my family needed. Perfect for what I needed too. We parked, sat there for a moment. The engine ticked as it cooled. Nobody moved. Then Dad spoke. His voice was hard, final. He told me that after this was done, I was on my own, that they were washing their hands of me, that I'd burned every bridge and destroyed every relationship. I nodded, told him I understood. Mom added that I'd better not come crawling back when I hit rock bottom, that this was it, the end of any connection between us. I told her I wouldn't. Tyler turned around to look at me. His expression was something between pity and contempt. He said that maybe this would teach me something about consequences, about how the real world works, about what happens when you try to play games you don't understand. I almost smiled at that. Almost, because he had no idea how right he was about games and understanding. But instead of smiling, I just looked down at my hands and nodded like I was taking his wisdom to heart. He seemed satisfied, turned back around, opened his door. We all got out of the car and walked toward that cheap legal office with its flickering sign and its promise of fast, affordable family law services. My parents walked ahead, Tyler beside them. I trailed behind, playing the role of the defeated son one last time. Behind my hands, which I brought up to my face like I was overwhelmed with shame and regret, I allowed myself the smallest smile. Not a big theatrical grin, just a tiny acknowledgement of what was about to happen. They thought they were cutting loose a liability. What they were actually doing was signing away their claim to $84 million. And they were about to do it eagerly, desperately, with lawyers and witnesses and notary stamps. Dad reached the door to the office, pulled it open, gestured for everyone to go inside. This was it, the moment where everything changed. I took a breath, put on my best expression of misery and defeat, and walked through that door to watch my family destroy themselves with their own greed. The lawyer's office was exactly what you'd expect from a place that advertised emergency legal services after business hours. Cheap paneling on the walls, fluorescent lights that hummed with a frequency that made your teeth ache, a waiting room with chairs that had probably been there since the 80s, their fabric worn thin and stained with decades of other people's desperation. The receptionist's desk was empty. Of course it was. This was an after-hours emergency appointment, which meant we got the lawyer himself, no support staff, just a guy trying to make some extra cash off other people's family drama. He appeared from a back office within seconds of us walking in, mid-50s, overweight in that specific way that comes from too many years of sitting behind a desk. His suit had probably fit him properly once, maybe a decade ago. Now it strained at the buttons. His tie was loosened around his neck, like he'd been wearing it for 12 hours and couldn't wait to take it off. He introduced himself as Mitchell Crane, shook hands with my dad and Tyler, but barely glanced at me. I was the problem being dealt with, not a client worth acknowledging. He invited us into his office. The space was cramped and cluttered. File folders covered every surface. His desk was buried under paperwork. The computer monitor was one of those old, thick ones that took up half the desk. There was a faint smell of old coffee and something else, maybe mildew from the carpet that hadn't been replaced in 20 years. We sat in the chairs facing his desk, Mom and Dad in the middle, Tyler to the side, me at the end like I was already being pushed out of the family portrait. Crane settled into his chair with a wheeze and asked what brought us in tonight. Mom launched into the explanation before anyone else could speak. She was talking fast, her words running together slightly from the wine. She painted a picture of a crisis. Her irresponsible son gambling with money he didn't have, creating catastrophic debt, put an entire family at risk. She made it sound like I deliberately attacked them, like this was a calculated assault rather than a terrible mistake. The emotion in her voice was real, which was almost impressive considering she was describing a situation that didn't actually exist. Crane listened, taking notes with a pen that looked like he'd stolen it from a hotel. He'd occasionally make a sound of acknowledgement, a grunt or a hum, to show he was following along. When Mom finally ran out of steam, he turned to me, asked if what she described was accurate. I nodded, confirmed that I'd made a terrible mistake with margin trading, that I owed a huge sum I couldn't possibly repay, that my family was worried about being held liable for my debt. My voice was small, defeated. The performance was getting easier with each repetition. Crane asked some basic questions. How much exactly did I owe? When did this happen? Did I have any assets of my own? Any income beyond my warehouse job? I answered honestly about everything except the thing that mattered. No assets, no savings, just minimum wage jobs and overwhelming debt. Tyler jumped in with technical details. He explained margin trading to the lawyer like he was teaching a class, talked about leverage and liquidation, and how exchange debt worked. He was showing off his knowledge, establishing himself as the smart one in the family. Crane seemed impressed, or at least interested. He asked Tyler a few follow-up questions about the mechanics of debt collection in these situations. Tyler explained that because I was registered at their address, collection agencies could potentially pursue assets at that location, that they could file liens against property, that the safest approach was complete legal separation. Crane nodded along, said that what they were asking for was definitely possible, that he could draft a family financial separation agreement establishing clear boundaries. Dad asked how quickly it could be done. His voice had an edge of desperation. He wanted this handled now, tonight, before I could do any more damage. Crane said he could have a document ready within the hour if they were willing to wait. His rate for emergency service was higher than usual. He mentioned casually, but it would be legally binding. Dad said price wasn't an issue. They just needed it done. So we waited. Crane disappeared back into his office to draft the document. We sat in that depressing waiting room, not talking, just existing in our separate bubbles of tension. I kept my head down, maintained the posture of someone who destroyed their life and knew it. Inside, I was calm, focused, counting down the minutes until this would be over. 20 minutes passed. 30. I could hear Crane's printer running. The mechanical were of paper feeding through. Each page was another nail, and the coffin my family was building for themselves. Finally, he emerged with a stack of papers, called us back into his office. We sat down in the same positions. Crane spread the documents across his desk, started explaining the terms in that particular tone lawyers use when they want to sound important. Full financial separation, no mutual responsibility for debts, no claim to each other's assets, legal acknowledgement that I was an independent adult with no family financial ties. As he read through the sections, I watched my parents' faces. They were nodding along, eager and relieved. This was exactly what they wanted. Protection, distance, legal proof that my problems weren't their problems. Then Dad interrupted, asked Crane to add something about future assets. Crane looked up, asked what he meant. Dad explained that he wanted to make sure this covered not just current debts, but any future issues. That if somehow I ever got money down the road, if I ever managed to get back on my feet, he wanted it clear that I had no claim to anything of theirs and they had no obligation to me. Crane considered this, said that was actually a smart addition, that they should include a clause about complete separation from all assets, past, present, and future, that it was standard practice in these situations to make the language comprehensive. He made notes on the document, added the language right there in front of us. Mom suggested another addition. She wanted it stated explicitly that I no longer resided at their address, that I had no claim to the house, that they were not responsible for providing me with shelter. Crane added that too. His pen scratched across the paper, each word another brick in the wall between us. Tyler threw in his contribution. He wanted a clause stating that the separation was voluntary on my part, that I acknowledged I was being treated fairly and had no legal grievances. Smart kid. He was covering their bases, making sure I couldn't come back later and claim I'd been coerced. Too bad for him. I wanted this even more than they did. Crane incorporated all their suggestions. The document was growing longer, more detailed, more ironclad. They were so focused on protecting themselves from my fake debt that they couldn't see they were signing away their claim to real money. When he finished the revisions, Crane printed new copies, handed them around, started walking through each section, explaining the legal language. My parents weren't really listening. They just wanted to sign. But I listened carefully to every word, made sure this document would do exactly what I needed it to do. The language was perfect. Complete financial separation. No claim to each other's assets in any form, at any time, past, present, or future. Voluntary agreement with no coercion. Full legal acknowledgement that we were financially independent entities. Crane asked if everyone understood the terms. If anyone had questions. Nobody did. They were ready to sign. He slid the papers across the desk, indicated where each person needed to put their signature. Mom grabbed a pen first, signed with quick, angry strokes. Her signature was sharp, aggressive. She pushed the paper toward Dad. Dad signed more slowly but with the same determination. His expression was grim. This hurt him, I could tell, but not enough to stop him. The house mattered more than his son. Tyler signed as a witness. His signature was neat, precise, proud of himself for being part of the solution. Then the paper came to me. I picked up the pen, let my hand shake just a little, like the weight of this moment was almost too much, like I was struggling with what this meant. I looked up at my parents, asked one last question. If they were really sure about this, if this was really what they wanted. Mom actually laughed, told me to stop being dramatic and sign the paper, that I'd made this choice when I destroyed my life with stupid trading, that they weren't going to let me drag them down with me. She said I'd never amount to anything anyway, that they wanted a guarantee I wouldn't come crawling back when I hit rock bottom. The casual cruelty in her voice was almost beautiful. It made what I was about to do feel not just justified, but necessary. I signed my name. The pen felt lighter than it should have. Such a small action. Such massive consequences. Crane witnessed all our signatures, pulled out his notary stamp, and pressed it onto the document with a satisfying thunk. Made it official, legal, binding. Just like that, I was officially not their son anymore. At least not in any way that mattered legally. Dad paid in cash. A thick stack of bills. Crane counted it, satisfied. Gave them copies of the document in a folder. Told them to keep it safe. That this paper was their protection if anyone came asking about family finances. We stood up, shook hands. Crane wished them luck. Completely ignored me. The walk back to the car was silent. A different kind of silence than before. This one was final. Heavy. The kind of silence that comes after something ends. We drove home through empty streets. Late enough that most people were already asleep. The occasional streetlight, throwing pools of yellow on the asphalt. Houses dark except for the blue glow of televisions in a few windows. When we pulled into the driveway, Dad killed the engine, sat there for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Then he turned around and looked at me, told me I had 10 minutes to get my things and leave, that if I wasn't gone by the time he finished his beer, he'd call the police and have me removed for trespassing. The speed of it caught me off guard, even though I'd been expecting it. We just walked in the door, and already they wanted me gone. I got out of the car, went to my room. The space looked smaller than usual. Everything I owned suddenly seemed insignificant. Clothes, books, the cheap laptop, posters on the wall from high school. I grabbed my backpack, threw in some clothes, my laptop, the charger, some basic toiletries. Left everything else. None of it mattered anymore. Before I left, I had to see Grandma Nancy one more time. I walked to her room, knocked softly even though she couldn't answer, opened the door. She was awake, propped up in bed, watching one of her game shows with the volume low. When she saw me, her face lit up with that smile she could still manage. I sat on the edge of her bed, took her good hand in mine. The words came out in a whisper. I told her everything was going to be okay, that I was leaving for a little while, but she shouldn't worry, that what just happened was part of a plan, that I was going to come back for her very soon. I told her to hold on just a little bit longer, to be strong, that I loved her more than anything in the world. Her eyes filled with tears. She squeezed my hand 3 times. Our code, I love you. I kissed her forehead. Let myself have one moment of real emotion in the middle of all this calculated deception. She was the only person in this house who'd ever actually loved me, the only one worth saving. I promised her again that I'd be back, that she wouldn't have to stay with them much longer. Then I stood up and walked out of her room for what I thought might be the last time. Tyler was in the hallway, told me my 10 minutes were up, that it was time to go. I didn't argue, just walked to the front door with my backpack. The family was in the living room, watching me leave like I was trash being taken out. Dad with his beer, Mom with her wine, Tyler standing there with his arms crossed, making sure I actually left. Dad yelled something about never coming back, about how I wasn't welcome here anymore, how I burned every bridge. I didn't respond, just opened the door and walked out into the night. It was raining. Of course it was raining. Cold drops that soaked through my jacket within seconds. The kind of miserable weather that matched the scene perfectly. I walked down the driveway with my backpack over one shoulder, got to the sidewalk, looked back at the house one time. Every light was on. I could see their silhouettes through the windows. They'd already gone back to whatever they were doing before, already forgotten about me. I pulled out my phone and called a cab, gave him the address of a motel across town, the kind of place that charged by the week and didn't ask questions. While I waited, I stood there in the rain. Let it wash over me. And something strange happened. The weight I'd been carrying for 19 years started to lift. The cab pulled up. I got in. The driver asked if I was okay, probably because I was soaking wet and carrying everything I own in a backpack. I told him I was fine. Better than fine, actually. As we drove away, I watched the house disappear in the rearview mirror. That prison, that tomb, that place where a loved one to die. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, found the fake trading screenshot I created, looked at it one last time, then deleted it. Didn't need it anymore. The driver asked where I was headed with all my stuff, if I was starting fresh somewhere. I told him, yeah, something like that. We drove through the empty streets, past closed businesses and dark houses. The rain kept falling. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm. I thought about the lottery ticket hidden in a secret pocket I'd sewn into the lining of my backpack. $84 million in a piece of paper smaller than a receipt. I thought about the document I'd just signed, the legal separation my family had demanded, the protection they thought they'd secured for themselves. And I allowed myself a small smile. This was the last time I'd see that house as a poor person. The last time I'd be at anyone's mercy. The last time I'd have to pretend I was powerless. Everything was about to change. For weeks later, the world looked very different. I'd spent that first week in the motel planning, making phone calls, setting things in motion. I researched which state lottery offices allowed anonymous claims through trusts. Found one that did. Hired lawyers to set up the structure. Good lawyers. The kind that cost $500 an hour and were worth every penny. The claim was filed through an LLC I created specifically for this purpose. The press release from the Lottery Commission mentioned a winner from our state, but no name, no photo, no sob story about a kid from a poor family. Just a quiet transaction. Ticket verified. Money transferred. $84 million, less taxes. Still more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. The second week, I'd focus on Grandma Nancy. I hired a different set of lawyers, specialists in elder law and guardianship cases. Gave them everything I had. The recording I'd secretly made of my parents discussing letting her die. Medical records showing inadequate care. Photos of the pressure sores she developed from being left in bed too long. Documentation of missed medications. They told me it was a strong case. That emergency guardianship was definitely possible given the evidence of neglect and the threat to her well-being. We filed the paperwork. Got a court date. Moved fast because every day she stayed in that house was another day of danger. The third week, the court ruled in my favor. Emergency guardianship granted. I was now legally responsible for her care, which meant I could make medical decisions, living arrangements, everything. And as her guardian, I could remove her from any situation I deemed unsafe. The fourth week, I made my move. I'd hired a private medical transport company, the kind that moves patients in comfort and style. Bought a house in a nice neighborhood with single-story living and wide doorways for a wheelchair. Hired round-the-clock nursing care. Set up a proper medical suite with everything she'd need. I'd also hired movers to pack up her belongings. Every photo, every keepsake, every piece of furniture she'd accumulated over her lifetime. It was all coming with her. And I'd hired a real estate attorney to handle the sale of her house, because it was still legally hers, even if my parents had been living there rent-free. As her guardian, I had the authority to sell it. My parents were about to get a very rude awakening. I chose a sunny morning for the visit. Wanted good visibility. Wanted the neighbors to see everything. I arrived in a convoy. My lawyer in one car. Medical transport in an ambulance. Police escort for what they call a civil standby. which is when officers supervise a potentially volatile situation, and me in a black town car that had probably cost more than my dad made in a year. The cars pulled up to the house that had been my prison, that I'd walked away from a month ago with nothing but a backpack and a secret. We parked, got out. My parents must have heard the commotion because they came rushing out onto the porch. Dad first, then Mom right behind him. Both of them looked confused and angry. Tyler appeared in the doorway. He was on his phone, probably filming this because he thought he was about to watch me get arrested. Mom was yelling before anyone could explain what was happening, screaming that I didn't live here anymore, that they had a legal document, that I was trespassing. She was waving the separation agreement like it was a weapon, the papers we'd signed at the lawyer's office. Her proof that I had no claim to anything. Dad was demanding the police arrest me, saying I was violating the terms of our separation, that I was harassing them. I let them rant for a minute, let them work themselves up, let them think they had control of the situation. Then I stepped forward. The change in their expressions was instant. Shock, confusion, something that might have been fear. I was dressed in a suit that cost more than their car, Italian leather shoes, a watch that probably cost more than they made in 6 months. I looked like money, because I was money. My lawyer stepped forward too, introduced himself in that calm, professional way expensive attorneys have, the kind of voice that makes you understand immediately that you're outmatched. He explained that I had no debts, that the trading disaster they'd been so worried about never actually existed, that I was here in my capacity as Grandma Nancy's legal guardian. Mom's face went white. She asked what he was talking about. What guardian? What legal standing? My lawyer handed her papers. Court documents. The guardianship order. All official. All legal. All signed by a judge. Dad grabbed the papers and started reading. His hands were shaking. His face was going from white to red. He was putting the pieces together. Tyler was frozen on the porch steps. His phone had stopped recording. He was just staring at me like I'd grown a second head. My lawyer continued explaining, said that as Nancy's guardian, I determined she was being neglected, that her current living situation was unsafe, that I was removing her to appropriate medical care. Mom started screaming, saying they'd taken care of Nancy for years, that they'd sacrificed everything, that I had no right. My lawyer cut her off, mentioned the recording of them discussing withholding her medication, the medical evidence of neglect, the pressure sores, the mistreatments, asked if she'd like him to play the recording for the police officers currently standing in their driveway. She went silent. So did Dad. They both looked sick. Then Mom's expression changed. She'd realized something. Her eyes got wide. She looked at me, at my clothes, at the lawyers, at everything. She asked how much I'd won. And there it was. Not how are you? Not where have you been? Not even anger about being caught neglecting Nancy. Just how much money. My lawyer smiled. Cold, professional, told her that according to the separation agreement she'd insisted on signing, she had no right to information about my financial assets, that they specifically waived all claims to my property, past, present, or future. Then he mentioned the amount anyway, just because he could, just because the look on their faces was worth it. $84 million. The silence that followed was beautiful, perfect, complete. Dad made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Tyler actually dropped his phone. Mom just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then she started moving toward me, arms out, tears suddenly appearing, saying she knew I'd come back. That family was family. That blood was thicker than water. The police officers stepped between us. My lawyer had briefed them in advance. They knew what to expect. Mom was trying to push past them, calling me baby, sweetheart, saying she'd always believed in me, that they'd just been trying to teach me responsibility. It was fascinating watching her try to rewrite history in real time, erasing the cruelty, the neglect, the eager way she'd sign me away. Tyler had recovered enough to start talking. He was going on about how he'd taught me everything I knew, how his expertise had helped me understand the market, how this was really a team effort. The shamelessness was almost impressive. Dad was just standing there, doing math in his head, probably calculating how much 84 million was when divided by 4 family members, figuring out his share. My lawyer addressed them all, explained that they needed to step back, that we were here for Nancy and nothing else. The medical transport team was already moving toward the house. I'd given them the layout in advance. They knew exactly where Nancy's room was. I walked past my parents, past Tyler, up the porch steps I'd walked up and down thousands of times, into the house that had been my prison. Mom was following me, still trying her act, saying we should talk, that we could work this out. That family stuck together. I didn't respond, just walked straight to Nancy's room. She was in bed, watching her shows. When she saw me, her face transformed. Pure joy, recognition, love. The medical team was gentle, professional. They explained what was happening, that she was going to a better place, that I'd be with her. She squeezed my hand 3 times. I love you. I squeezed back, told her we were going home. They moved her to the transport gurney with careful efficiency, made sure she was comfortable, secured the straps, started wheeling her out. Mom tried to block the hallway, said they couldn't just take her, that this was kidnapping. My lawyer mentioned the word guardianship again, slowly, like he was talking to a child, explained that this was completely legal, that interfering would result in criminal charges. The police officers backed him up, told my parents to step aside. We moved through the house, down the hall, through the living room, out the front door. The neighbors were watching now, standing in their yards, on their porches, whispering to each other. As we loaded Nancy into the medical transport, I turned back to my parents, told them there was one more thing. My lawyer handed Dad another set of papers. These ones were different. A notice of intent to sell the property. Dad asked what this meant. His voice was barely a whisper. I explained that as Nancy's guardian, I had authority over her assets, that the house was still legally hers, that I decided it needed to be sold to fund her care. The look on his face was everything. I told them they had 30 days to vacate the premises, that the real estate agent would be in touch about showings, that they should start looking for new accommodations. Mom was shrieking now, saying this was their home, their security, their retirement plan. I mentioned that according to the legal separation they'd insisted on, they had no claim to my assets or my decisions, that this was entirely within my rights as Nancy's guardian. Tyler finally found his voice, started going on about how I'd tricked them, how the debt was fake, how I'd manipulated them. I looked at him, really looked at him, let him see exactly how little I cared about his opinion, told him he'd been right about one thing, that knowledge really was power, and that his expertise in margin trading had been incredibly useful, just not in the way he'd intended. The understanding that dawned on his face was beautiful. The realization that his own knowledge had been weaponized against him, that every technical detail he'd added to make my fake debt sound more convincing had been another nail in his own coffin. I got into my car. The medical transport pulled away first, Nancy safe inside. The lawyers followed. The police escort. I was the last to leave. As my driver pulled away from the curb, I looked back one final time, saw my parents standing in the driveway of a house that was about to be taken from them, saw Tyler realizing that his smugness and his expertise had been his downfall, saw the life I was leaving behind forever. The driver asked where to next. I gave him the address of Nancy's new home, our new home, the place I'd set up for both of us. He nodded, started driving. 3 months later, I'm sitting on the patio of a house overlooking the ocean. The sound of waves is constant, soothing. The air smells like salt and freedom. Nancy is in her chair next to me, a blanket over her legs even though it's warm out. She looks healthier than I've seen her in years. Proper nutrition, constant care, physical therapy, that's actually helping. I'm reading to her from a book she loves, something about gardens and seasons and the passage of time. She's listening with her eyes closed, a small smile on her face. The nursing staff is inside, preparing lunch. There's a chef who comes in to make her favorite meals. physical therapists who visit 3 times a week, everything she needs. I don't think about my parents much anymore. Last I heard, they'd found a cheap apartment across town. Dad got a job doing part-time maintenance work. Mom was working retail. Tyler moved back in with them because his crypto genius routine didn't translate to actual income. They tried to sue me. Multiple lawyers told them they had no case. The separation agreement they'd insisted on was ironclad. The guardianship was legitimate. The sale of the house was legal. Every door they tried to open, I'd already locked from the inside. Sometimes I see them at a distance. In stores. On the street. They pretend not to see me. I return the favor. The money is nice. I won't pretend it isn't. But that's not what I won. I won the ability to protect someone I love. I won freedom from people who saw me as nothing more than a burden. I won the right to make my own choices and live my own life. I won Nancy's final years being filled with comfort instead of neglect. That's worth more than $84 million. That's worth everything. Nancy squeezes my hand 3 times. I love you. I squeeze back 3 times. I love you too. The waves keep rolling in. The sun is warm on my face. The book is good. Life is good. And I earned every second of it.